Hello, everyone out there in Radio Land. It is once again that time of the week. What time of the week is it? Well, it is that time of the week where we dig underneath the headlines. We talk about what the mainstream media is not talking about, and generally call out the establishment on its BS. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Now, as always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University. So I'm going to be flying solo today. Might cut the show a little bit quicker than usual, and by that I mean maybe down to like 90 minutes, an hour 45, something like that. There's only so long that I can just blather on and expound about the crazy state of our world, but obviously there is a lot to talk about today. We're going to dive in and talk about, the President Jack-O-Lantern's emergency declaration. He declared it, of course. Also going to be talking about how the state of Michigan has responded and some other very important local issues that might have kind of fallen underneath everyone's radar while we've had several very big pieces of news in the last few days, and that does in fact include a little announcement yesterday about this guy. You may have heard of him, Bernard Sanders, announcing that he is throwing his hat into the ring. Of course, I think I'm going to have a little bit of a different take on it when we start talking about it, but first, I wanted to make sure we dove into some important local stories here in the state of Michigan before we jump on to the national stuff. And I actually wanted to start off with some good news. So, we're going to talk a little bit about some stuff going on in Lansing that have happened over the last week. And one of them's good, one of them is not so good. And let's go in with the good news first. So these are both kind of related to the state legislature. Well, actually, this first story isn't related to the state legislature. I'm misspeaking. The second story is, but this one has to do about a story we've covered on this program before. There has been some alarm from the activist community, in particular groups like Cosecha. Particularly Cosecha Grand Rapids has been doing a lot on this. There has been kind of a debate going back and forth in Ionia about basically leasing out a former state prison to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and turning it into a detention center. So I'm going to read from the MLive article. This was published on February 16th by John Tunison. No immigration detention center at former Ionia prison, governor says. Governor Gretchen Whitmer has put the brakes on a proposal to build an immigration detention center on a former prison property in Ionia. The governor decided Friday, February 14th, that a proposed sale of state property to the Immigration Centers of America would not happen. ICA was working with the Michigan Land Bank Fast Track Authority to buy the former Deerfield Correctional Center property on Harwood Road in Ionia. Once a renovation and rebuilding was complete, the facility would have a 600-bed capacity to house Immigration and Customs Enforcement detainees. Tiffany Brown, the press secretary for Whitmer, said the governor wanted a guarantee from ICA that such a facility would not be used to detain people separated from their children or other family members. Representatives from ICA could not make that guarantee, Brown said, as well as agree to other conditions without ICE signing off. The governor believes that building more detention facilities won't solve our immigration crisis, and also believes that separating families does not reflect our Michigan values. Therefore, the governor has decided that the sale of state property in Deerfield to ICA will not move forward. As the governor said before, it's time for President Trump and Congress to work together on a bipartisan immigration reform plan that keeps communities safe, protects American jobs, and keeps families together, Brown said. Brown said that when Whitmer took office in January, she began a review process that involved input from local elected officials, community leaders, civil rights groups, and ICA officials. So a couple of points I want to highlight here. First of all, I will give, and if you listen to this show regularly, you know there's kind of provisional props to more establishment type of politicians when they decide to make the morally correct decisions. Of course, that is with a caveat. You know, I could and will and am about to make a little bit more of a farther left critique here. One, obviously, I think it's a little bit repugnant that we were even having this discussion in the first place. Of course, my personal politics, anarcho-socialism. I'm not really a big believer in things like borders or having an immigrations and customs enforcement agency to begin with. And I think, this decision, as her press secretary kind of reeled out, said it was conditional on whether or not ICE would be detaining children or families that had been separated at this facility. And while, again, that is a morally correct decision to kind of draw a line in the sand there, I would say, pushing further, we have an agency that has really revealed its true face under the Trump administration. Again, ICE was not really very nice under George W. Bush or Barack Obama either. There have been numerous reports of institutionalized sexual abuse, general emotional abuse, lack of care, lack of treatment. Things were marginally better under Obama, and we should be very clear that the Trump administration adds a deliberate and extra layer of cruelty to the proceedings. But again, making the ICE detention center conditional, if I were to football quarterback these politics a little bit, if my butt was sitting behind the governor's desk, wouldn't even consider letting ICE have a facility in Michigan for a second. Their track record is bad enough to sit down and negotiate with them on this point. A very important point, of course, but a point that rises up, again, from the organic and pre-existing corruption and unethical practices that ICE has been practicing for many years now, that go before Donald Trump, that go before when, frankly, the mainstream media finally paid attention to how horrible our immigration system is. Because, again, one of the things the Trump administration is quite good at is really peeling back the curtain and exposing the face of American imperialism in the most gross and overt terms possible. And again, to see these families be separated was agonizing and horrible for most Americans to see. However, what most Americans do not know is the separation of families and the like. This is something that's actually in the ICE rule book. I mean, it's not officially called the rule book. It's I think it's the handbook. I might be paraphrasing, but in their original kind of documents that came about, when they were formed in the wake of 9/11, basically specifies it as a tactic to be used to basically deter immigration. That this kind of emotional and psychological damage can be used as a threat, as something to be levied against the immigration population when immigration numbers, they believe, are too high. Or, in the case of the Trump administration, when the immigration numbers are actually low, but you need a scapegoat for your base so they don't pay attention to all of the swamp monsters you've filled your administration with and all of the handouts you have been giving to the rich. Or, and plus a likely CIA psyop talking about how he's opposing the deep state and whatnot. Talking about Q, of course. So, while that seems like a little bit of a deep rabbit hole to go down, I did want to just make that clear. Like, even in this rhetoric, there's a certain capitulation to the status quo. There's a capitulation to ICE itself. I think it's kind of the subtext of this statement is that, oh, well, if Donald Trump and his administration weren't around, ICE would be just fine. They wouldn't be doing these sorts of things. And, ICE would be okay if they weren't separating families in such an overt and public fashion. Again, abolish ICE are not just pretty words. It does not mean reform ICE. It means get rid of it. We do not need an immigration and customs enforcement agency that is frankly superfluous to existing law enforcement, superfluous to there's an agency which again is also corrupt as all hell called Customs and Border Patrol, but again it's redundant, and it only exists in the wake of 9/11 to basically carry out the security of an increasingly totalitarian surveillance state, and I am, of course, speaking about the United States of America. And again, we've been going in that direction for many years now. This precedes Donald Trump. So, with that, kind of compliment towards the governor while also doing a more radical critique. And actually, one other thing about this article, and particularly about the statement from the press secretary, these words particularly struck me. It's time for President Trump and Congress to work together on a bipartisan immigration reform plan that keeps communities safe, protects American jobs, and keeps families together. So, pardon me if I feel like this is kind of pandering to the people that feel like, oh, immigrants are coming up and causing all kinds of crime, which, again, there's a substantial part of the Michigan electorate who do believe that. So it's like trying to have it both ways. It's like saying, like, well, we certainly need to keep those criminal immigrants out of our communities and keep them from taking our jobs, but we also shouldn't separate families. That's just bad. It's saying that you somehow have the moral high ground on the first 2 points, but not on the latter. When again, protecting American jobs and keeping the community safe from his immigrants from south of the border are both pieces of right-wing propaganda and talking points. And of course, if you look at the actual data, again, citizens commit far more crimes than non-citizens. And frankly, if you just walk through the logic of that, it just makes a lot of sense on its own. If you are in danger of being deported constantly, you're probably not going to go out of your way to commit crime. In fact, you're probably going to try to avoid that so that you do not get deported. People who are citizens do not have to worry about getting deported. So for the same crime that could get a non-citizen deported, it might let's say like reckless driving, you might spend a night in jail as a citizen. So, and again, protecting American jobs, it's based on that whole thing that, immigrants, there is absolutely no way for an immigrant to come up and steal your job. Your boss is giving your job to that immigrant. I think back to the kind of controversy that was going on in Comstock, where Winky greenhouses, they were seeking a permit to build some housing for immigrants that really sounded substandard and frankly had its own kind of human rights issues on its own. But yeah, there's this worry about, there was this justified complaint. It's like, why doesn't Winky just hire people from the community? But there was also the kind of racial dog whistling around like, oh, these strange men who are going to come up and we don't know them. I worry about my children. Implications that they were basically going to come up and be nefarious in the community and assault people. But yeah, again, it's placating to that dog whistling. And, granted, I haven't had a tremendous laundry list of complaints about Whitmer since she got in. I think, again, it's important to keep the eyes on somebody who, while certainly to the left of a lot of our former governors, does have a lot of deep ties to various corporations, including Blue Cross and Blue Shield. However, we also need to look at like how politicians message, how they work into their messaging. And again, I think that frankly, there's a lot of placating to false propaganda, false beliefs about how immigrants actually, function and how they actually live here in the United States for the most part. Obviously, groups like MS-13 do exist, but frankly, they pale in comparison to groups like the Proud Boys, groups, neo-Nazi groups, and of course, one could also talk about how the roots of gangs like MS-13 are from immigrants, largely from areas that the United States has destabilized in Central and South Latin America, and of course, their main cash cow comes from our country's mishandling of the war on drugs. So, again, a soft approval with a more radical leftist critique. So, I wanted to talk about another thing that this is actually something Whitmer tried to do that I was very much in favor of. She had plans to restructure the DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality. And I'm going to give a little bit of context before I really dig into the article. But basically, the Republican-controlled legislature at Lansing shot this plan down. And for a lot of activists, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, actually, I'll just cite a protest I was part of. Last year or 2017, everything's been awash since and just jumbled together since the orange one got into office. But in the last 2 years, there was a protest at the Department of Environmental Quality organized by Michigan United, specifically talking about sacrifice zones in the area code in Michigan affected by the Marathon petroleum plants, which, again, are disproportionately poor and disproportionately black, and the people in that community are experiencing the pollution and getting sick. A lot of high cancer rates are springing up in that area. And the DEQ, their main indictment against the DEQ is that it was very, very conservative to begin with and basically acted as a rubber stamping agency to known polluters. So when Governor Whitmer got into office, one of her plans was to restructure the DEQ from this particular status quo. So when people ask, like, why would she need to restructure it? That was what the DEQ was and is. And if you want a Department of Environmental Quality that actually cares about environmental quality, you need to go in there and really kind of rebuild the thing from the ground up. Of course, the Michigan GOP did not like that very much. So here is what happened. This is from the Michigan radio, Michigan NPR. This is where this article is from. And I'm going to read from this. This is from February 14th. It's by Chana Ross. Whitmer's plans to restructure the DEQ are dead for now. Governor Gretchen Whitmer's plan to restructure the state Department of Environmental Quality is dead. The Senate voted to overturn the order on Thursday. This was the final votes the Republican-led legislature needed to eliminate Whitmer's order. The main reason Republicans didn't like the order is because it would have eliminated several environmental oversight panels they created last year. Those panels are able to, in part, overrule the DEQ's decision on permits. So basically, they strengthened even the little oversight that the DEQ was doing. The Republican-led legislature imposed these new things to basically, if something came in through the cracks that would have negatively affected the bottom line of one of the donors who get so many of the Michigan GOP Congress people into office up in Lansing, if something that would have been unfortuitous to them had been brought to this particular panel, these panels that they referred to could have overruled it and protected that particular corporation. Business organizations came out in favor of the panels. That's quoted from the article. They even go out and say it. Senate Majority Leader Jim Ananich from Flint says these panels open the door for special interests having the final say on pollution. They just voted to allow polluters to have a free pass, and the citizens of Michigan took it on the chin, he says. But Republicans say the panels protect citizens from potential overreach by the department. By overreach, that's usually when Republicans talk about overreach, that's code word for actually protect the citizens of Michigan. Senator Ed McBroom, Republican from Dickinson, chairs the committee that passed the measure to eliminate Whitmer's order. He says the panels provide valuable oversight of the DEQ. Who's taking the complaints about the department that abuses the people? Who's watching the watcher? Who watches the watchman? Which I guess Rorschach was always kind of a right-wing proto-fascist kind of, but these damn liberals, the streets are with blood. They'll ask for my help, and I'll say no. And then I'll make sure my buddies over at Enbridge get to do whatever the hell they want in the Kalamazoo River. All right, so going on, Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkley says he's open to continuing the conversation with Whitmer about restructuring the department. I think our process has been very deliberate, very specific, and very thorough, he says. Well, I can't argue with that. It's been very thorough in protecting business interests. Okay. Whitmer says she wanted to get rid of unnecessary bureaucracy. A spokesman for the governor says Whitmer will continue to try to restructure the department to ensure clean drinking water and safeguard public health. Whitmer has asked Attorney General Dana Nessel for an opinion on the legality of those panels. Excuse me. So, I really summed it all up at the beginning here, but I did want to make sure and emphasize again. This is the result of gerrymandering and the corporate control of our state. And luckily with the gerrymandering, we've of course made some progress on that, but having these corporate mouthpieces in our state legislature, it's what allows these corporations to get away with polluting Michigan, even when the vast majority of Michiganders, are even the most conservative Michiganders that you talk to are very protective of our environment. In fact, the big reason that Rick Snyder started to kind of walk back a little bit on the Enbridge oil pipeline was the concern of a lot of conservative business people who live on the shores of Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, etc., who were concerned about what it could do to their tourist dollars, and also had a genuine love and affinity for Michigan's environment. Again, we talk a lot about reactionaries on this show and poo-poo them a lot, but there are reactionary people out here in the state of Michigan who do have a profound love and care for the environment and want it to be protected, even if they have been listening to too much bootlicking nonsense. But again, I think the general point I'm trying to make is like actual rank and file conservatives usually care a lot more about the environment than the people who actually end up getting elected. And of course, those that get elected are basically carrying out the marching orders of corporations like Marathon, like Enbridge, so on and so forth. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and take a little break. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food. It may not be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Hello, everybody out there. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So if you're just joining us, we just talked about a few local issues. Department of Environmental Quality, Ionia, will not be hosting an ICE facility anytime soon, at least. Now let's pivot to... Well, talk a little bit about the national emergency. And I'm going to start from a local angle, and then I thought, unfortunately, neither of my co-hosts are here, so I'll give my thoughts on it, but there's not... I prefer, like, kind of a robust discussion about the national emergency declaration. But I'll tell y'all what I think about it. So, again, Michigan is one of the states that have joined the lawsuits against it, and I wanted to cite specifically what Dana Nessel had to say, our ostensibly progressive attorney general. She, of course, says it's unconstitutional. And this is from an MLive article. It was published on February 19th. And it was written by Lauren Gibbons. So I'll go ahead and read from the article, and then we'll talk a little. We'll go into some thoughts and opinions on it. So, President Donald Trump's decision to declare a national emergency for border wall funding is an unconstitutional act, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel said Tuesday after joining a federal lawsuit to challenge the action. Michigan joined 15 other states Monday evening in seeking a court injunction to stop Trump from declaring a national emergency to access funds to build a border wall. Nessel told reporters Tuesday she viewed the lawsuit as an important step to stand up for the state of Michigan to ensure the executive is not improperly absconding with funds that belong to our state. I see it as my job as Attorney General to make certain that the people of our state are protected against unconstitutional acts by the president, she said. We're in this very strange set of circumstances right now where I don't think the President of the United States cares very much about the Constitution. The lawsuit filed Monday seeks to protect revenue, natural resources, and economic interests from Trump's quote-unquote flagrant disregard of fundamental separation of powers, according to a press release from the Michigan Attorney General's office. Nessel said she was especially worried about how the diversion of funding could impact the Michigan National Guard. I'm very concerned that the money for this manufactured emergency is going to divert funds that can be utilized for our safety and protection here in the state of Michigan, Nessel said. Trump declared the emergency on Friday to obtain about $8 billion for building a wall along the border between the United States and Mexico. Joining Attorney General in the lawsuit, led by California Attorney General Xavier Becerra, are the Attorney Generals in Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, and Virginia. In a tweet, Trump said the reaction. Oh god. Oh, this is rich. In a tweet, Trump said the reaction was predictable and led mostly by the open border Democrats and the radical left. Oh boy. Just a little side note. I just find it hilarious what reactionaries like our president consider the American left, and who. By the way, I support open borders. There ain't anybody in our government currently elected who does. At least not in Congress. Definitely not at the state level. They do not support open borders. I do. It's kind of like that situation. Anybody seen that Hans Moleman meme? Where, say like the Republicans are like, you crazy Democrats just want open borders. And the Democrats are like, nobody said anything about open borders. And then like all of us anarchists and communists over in the corner here are just like, I was talking about open borders. So, and again, what passes for radical left in this country would be center left, if just plain old center in most countries. So, I wanted to talk a little bit. One, props to Dana Nessel for telling it like it is and throwing our state behind this lawsuit. The national emergency is definitely frivolous. However, of course, I want to talk about something specific I saw batting around. Again, the Trump administration has a lot of proto-fascist tendencies, and anybody who knows their history knows that the Nazis kind of solidified their power and became really kind of crossed that threshold into totalitarian state in a little something called the Reichstag fire. There was a fire, the Reichstag, which was kind of the central government building in Germany. And because of this, the Nazi Party declared a national emergency and more or less seized power. There are a lot of comparisons in the days and hours that followed Trump's declaration of a national emergency. And I wanted to maybe calm people's fears just a little bit with a reminder of the specific kind of fascist or proto-fascist that Donald Trump is, and how, I don't think we're necessarily... this is not our Reichstag fire, although I think it does factor into it. How does it factor into it? Well, Donald Trump, again, we talk a lot about he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he is a bit of an idiot savant when it comes to playing the national media, and again, also kind of playing towards his base, and also knowing what will excite the ire of our nation's liberals and leftists, particularly liberals, but also leftists to a certain extent. And he has an awareness that this connection is going to be made. I believe he does have this awareness about this particular connection between the Reichstag fire and this national emergency, so he knows he can kind of make the liberals hyperventilate for a bit, thinking about this, when he is certainly using the national emergency for his own purposes. It's multifold, but I don't think he's going to be using it to kind of, while he could, especially within the way that our laws are set up, I don't think he's going to be using this to clamp down with an iron boot. It's kind of a tactic of the Trump administration to feint towards civil rights, do something outrageous, and then feint towards human rights in an attempt to make the opposition, at least to his base, look ridiculous. So here's a perfect example of this. In the days that followed the national emergency, his administration basically called out they're going to fight for LGBT rights internationally and come down against governments that basically clamp down on them. So basically, he's able to use this whole controversy that he himself has created to say, like, oh, these liberals are comparing me to Hitler and to Nazis. Well, look what we're doing at the same time. These people look ridiculous. It's kind of a similar cudgel he's used when he's talking about, like, criminal justice reform. Recently, there have been some bills passed that Trump has rubber-stamped. And again, we cite the grassroots organizers that made that happen more than Donald Trump for that particular success. But there's always in the back, he's kind of using this to basically make the opposition look ridiculous to his own base. They can go back and say, like, oh, you're comparing him to Hitler when his administration is protecting the gays, and again, it's no coincidence that these things happened within days of each other, and it's important to note that doesn't alleviate or somehow make incorrect the proto-fascist nature of this presidency. And when I say proto, I mean it's not full-blown fascism. It's Donald Trump certainly would like much more control than he actually has, probably like a totalitarian sense of control. I'm not speculating about this. He has outright said this numerous times out in the open. However, fascism itself is driven by, some eliminationist ideologies. It's about literally So, the big difference between, say, like Hitler and somebody like Donald Trump is Hitler seized the opportunity of the Reichstag fire to seize control for the Nazi government, which in part had this religious-like ideology about the purity of the Aryan race, about the white race. Donald Trump, on the other hand, his only real allegiance or loyalty, it is not towards an ideology, it is towards money. Something that I would want the listener to keep in mind. I did a little bit of digging on this myself because I was just curious, like how does Donald Trump stand to benefit from the border wall? Besides, the politically, his base really wants this wall to be built, and if it actually gets built, it shows like, oh, he knows what he's doing. He's playing that four-dimensional chess. He's driving the liberals crazy with the national emergency. But also, he actually has direct financial ties to a steel company that is would be responsible and contracted to build the steel slats for the proposed wall. A friend of his stands to financially benefit, and so does Donald Trump. So, again, when you ask why the Trump administration does anything, you have to keep in mind two things. One, he's playing to a base that includes very reactionary characters and people who are outright fascists. Let's not forget, on the far right fringe of that reactionary base are literal freaking Nazis. But also, he keeps the eye on the ball. This is the base he needs to maintain like some shred of popular support. But since the day he got into office, he's treated the presidency as an opportunity for personal enrichment. The wall is no different. And for him, it's a win-win. He gets to placate his base and make some money on the side of the building of the wall. And again, it's likely why the government shutdown itself lasted so long. It wasn't necessarily to make a statement or plant his feet in the sand about, the safety of the national. I mean, one can speculate about whether Trump actually believes his own BS when it comes to the lies he tells about immigration. But one thing that we can point to, and we know for a fact, is that he stands to financially benefit from the building of this wall. That's something we do know for sure. So, again, don't worry so much about the Trump administration using a national emergency to seize power, but he is definitely going to use it, as he has since day one, to basically smash and grab. He's robbing the piggy bank with this national emergency, and there's likely many other avenues that he's going to kind of milk the public coffers in any way he can, using his presidential powers. Of course, that is not to say that there is not a fascistic threat. There is. And, of course, any time that the president kind of tries to inflame his base, there is more substantial danger from the very fascistic, violent far-right end of his base. So I just tell all my friends out there, what you really need to worry about, again, is vigilante violence. And, again, these things increase and spike up when Donald Trump is stoking fires like this national emergency. You got friends who are marginalized, who are the target of these Nazi FWAD groups. Just, keep an extra eye on them and make sure our community is safe. Make sure our community is safe from the fascists. So, with that, we're going to take a very quick break just so I can get my affairs in order and kind of pick out the next topic to talk about. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. I did want to talk about this is a particular issue from the east side of the country over in New York. But I did want to talk about it a little bit. I'm going to read a bit from an Intercept article that talks about it more in depth. This is from Natasha Leonard, published on February 15th. Headline is, Amazon pullout shows what anti-capitalist organizing and leftist politicians can do. When Amazon, the monopolistic retailer and ICE collaborator, which, by the way, that is there's a great article about that, announced last November that it would open its second headquarters in New York City, local resistance arose immediately. The day following the announcement, over 100 community activists, union leaders, and local politicians rallied in the Queens, New York neighborhood of Long Island City, where Amazon planned to build. In opposition to the deal, which included $3 billion worth of government kickbacks. Yet while resistance to Amazon's HQ2 was swift and formidable, the task of stopping the deal appeared Sisyphean. Really hard for those who maybe are not schooled on their Greek mythology. So, when Amazon announced on Thursday that it was canceling plans for the New York corporate campus, the news was met with delight and surprise. Amazon's owner, Jeff Bezos, is the richest man in history. Governor Andrew Cuomo promised the company that he'd change his name to Amazon Cuomo were the deal to go through. It is rare to win against a corporate government power nexus of this magnitude. The plan's thwarting offers a lesson in the possibility of forceful collective struggle against seemingly unbeatable Goliaths. It also proves the need for left-wing politicians and organizers to challenge and replace conservative, capitalist Democrats if we're able to wrest control of neighborhoods, cities, and public resources away from corporate interests and towards the good of existing communities. In its statement announcing the plan's cancellation, Amazon was explicit that its decision was in response to strong opposition from certain lawmakers. A number of state and local politicians have made it clear that they oppose our presence and will not work with us to build the type of relationships that are required to go forward, the company stated. What that really translates to is they were not okay with us bringing in our own workforce and gentrifying the hell out of their neighborhood, which essentially is what would have happened. There was actually open letters from places like Seattle that talked about this, about how it wasn't Amazon, when they come to your community, they don't necessarily create jobs. The few jobs that they do create, again, on the manufacturing side, are very low pay and arduous conditions. Of course, now they're at $15 an hour. But a lot of the time, it basically brings in labor from outside to come and work in the city and basically changes the makeup of the town. Gentrification fears were running high about this issue. The article might touch on this. In a statement announcing the plan's cancellation, Amazon was explicit that its decision was in response... It's true that these politicians played a crucial role, yet without consistent pressure and door-to-door canvassing from activists and community groups, including immigrant and worker advocate organizations, Make the Road NY, and Desi's Rising Up and Moving, alongside Teamsters and Queens residents, many elected officials would not have taken up a stance against Amazon. New York legislatures of old showed no such sensitivity to anti-gentrification and anti-corporate sentiment. Let's be clear who deserves the credit for this victory against Amazon: the working people of New York City who refused to let another company reap billions in corporate welfare at the expense of the city's social welfare, wrote New York City Council member Carlos Menchaca, a longtime opponent to the Amazon deal, on Twitter. Citing his opposition to the retail giant's anti-union policies in partnership with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Menchaca added, New York City cannot claim to be a sanctuary city if it gives taxpayer money to fund systems that spy, threaten, and deport our immigrant neighbors. Menchaca's praise for working people is apt. Political pressure from local organizers, activists, and community groups informed those lawmakers and indeed helped elect the new cadre of left-wing Democrats willing to take such a stance. Some of the most vocal New York legislators who opposed HQ2 were newly elected through grassroots campaigns on democratic socialist platforms. House Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and State Senator Julia Salazar are perhaps the most famous among them. As the New York Times reported earlier this week, last year's elections also paved the way for the nomination of State Senator Michael Gianaris, now a prominent Amazon opponent, to a state board with veto power over the deal. The nomination reportedly spooked the corporate Leviathan. The victory against Amazon and its dealmaker allies in New York's leadership shows the immediate material effects of upsetting the state and city's historically centrist and corporate-friendly order, as represented by the governor and the mayor. Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "Anything is possible. Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers and their neighbors defeated Amazon's corporate greed, its worker or exploitation, and the power of the richest man in the world." Amazon and its defenders are attempting to frame the New Deal's cancellation frame the deal's cancellation as a coup by politicians acting against the will of New Yorkers. Polls show that 70% of New Yorkers support our plans and investment, the company's statement said. And I really wanted to hit on this. This is a particular talking point of some of the pro-corporate liberals. But here's a good response. It is true that recent polls showed support for the project, especially among African American and Latinx residents. But such polls do not account for the fact that Amazon's promises to bring 25,000 plus quote-unquote good jobs and vast investment are poison pills. If Amazon's original HQ in Seattle is anything to go by, and that's something I was talking about earlier, the idea that those non-unionized, predominantly six-figure jobs would go to local working-class people is laughable. Meanwhile, HQ2 threatened to drive up already soaring property and retail prices in the area. And as Ocasio-Cortez noted in response to criticism, we were subsidizing those jobs with the $3 billion in tax breaks and other kickbacks for Amazon, a company that will pay nothing in federal taxes on $11.2 billion of profits made last year. It hardly speaks to the democratic will of the people when polls frame corporate sweetheart deals and inequality generators as simple job creators. In this sense, Amazon's claim to local popularity is about as legitimate as the misleading Brexit campaign's claim to represent the general will among Britons. Basically what they're talking about is those poll numbers are based on kind of this bait and switch idea. If you say, hey, do you want this corporation in your community that's going to create jobs, the vast majority of people are going to be like, yeah. But that statement in itself is false and misleading. It will create jobs, but not for the community. And in effect, the collateral damage of those jobs is going to result in rent prices going up, land values going up, and gentrification, as was just discussed here. Matt Stoller, an economist with the Open Markets Institute and critics of Amazon's market control, noted how disingenuous it was for the company to claim such popularity. If the question were framed differently, the deal would be a lot less popular, he wrote on Twitter. For instance, would you personally pay $375 for each member of your family to Jeff Bezos so that he could bring Amazon jobs to New York City? Referring to the fact that $3 billion of public money amounts to approximately $375 per New York City resident. Stoller added that while, of course, tax incentives don't work that way, his alternative framing is no more misleading than the polling Amazon touted as proof of popularity, saying, quote-unquote, would you accept great jobs in return for vague-sounding state and city incentives of up to $3 billion? It's going to get a high approval. Would you pay $375 to a billionaire for traffic jams and higher rent? Is not. This was not a popular deal. Closing out the article, it says, while the cancellation of HQ2 is a huge victory in and of itself, it also signals a welcome shift in political power away from the conservative Democrat status quo and gives hope for further challenges to the corporate stranglehold on city development and resource allotment. The attorney and former candidate for Attorney General, Zephyr Teachout, tweeted Thursday, "Oh, we are just beginning. Now let's get a congressional hearing on Amazon, labor, ICE, monopsony, how and why to break up Amazon." Checks on corporate hegemony and obscene inequality do not happen without pushing the Democratic Party to the left. When the Amazon deal was announced last year, Mayor Bill de Blasio remarked, one of the biggest companies on earth next to the largest public housing unit in the country, the synergy is going to be quite extraordinary. It is a welcome and overdue moment when a politician who utters such tone-deaf neoliberal peons can no longer pass as progressive. So with that, we're going to take a little bit of a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the new dealer elephant in the room. Yes, we are going to discuss the most recent candidate to announce in 2020, Mr. Bernard Sanders. Again, I'm going to only be speaking from my perspective. I'm sure in the concurrent weeks you'll get something more of a democratic socialist perspective from Lawrence. Couldn't make it today. But I'm just going to speak from my perspective as a capital S socialist. And you might like what I have to say, and you might not like some of what I have to say. Just warning y'all out there right now. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
This is George W. Bush, and you're listening to 89.1 WIDR, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Kalamazoo. You know what you're listening to, Kalamazoo, Michigan, man. What are you, stupid?
Stay tuned for Wider's weekly RSO Spotlight on WIDR Kalamazoo.
Hi, my name's Tori. I'm the president of the Criminal Justice Student Association, also known as CJSA. CJSA is an RSO on Western Michigan's campus that establishes a network among students who have an interest in criminal justice through events and speakers. We meet every other Monday at 7 p.m. in the Bernhardt Center. To find out more information about the Criminal Justice Student Association, follow us on Instagram at WMUCJSA.
This has been our weekly RSO Spotlight on WIDR Kalamazoo. For more information on how to spotlight your RSO, head to WIDRFM.org.
So, I am going to go use the little activist's restroom. In the meantime, please enjoy the sound of boron nuzzle. everyone. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So, you might have heard this Tuesday morning. Somebody announced their candidacy. Who is it? That got one fellow. Almost, I believe he almost clinched the nomination in the last presidential election. That is the nomination for the Democratic nominee. He has returned, as many people see, kind of like Gandalf coming back. Like, that's the kind of enthusiasm I've been seeing. And anybody who's been on Left Book the last couple of days, it's like taking a time machine and going back to 2015. All of the Bernie memes are all of a sudden very, very much back in circulation. Even from a lot of pages and sources that have been ostensibly pulling further and further to the left since the last election. So, before I dig into some of my thoughts on the Bernie's announcement on a personal level, there are a few things that I wanted to mention that I think we'll definitely be digging into in more depth in the next few weeks, particularly as I have my co-hosts on the show. But a quick reminder, some things about Bernie that really are not being discussed. I think the top thing that's not is there is a certain amnesia about what happened last time, i.e. it was rigged. The DNC rigged the primary against him. They could always do it again. They will try to do it again. I mean, there is an analysis of that. Again, we'll get into greater depth next time. But, some of the things that we should really be mindful of is, there were weird discrepancies in the vote totals, some election frauds where exit polls did not match up with the actual numbers in a way that really defied statistical possibility for falling in any sort of margin of error. There were studies that showed like the chance of it just being a random fluke were 1 in 6 billion. And again, voting machines, as have been shown, are notoriously easy to hack. And Diebold, which owns a lot of these machines, have a lot of financial connections to the Clintons and the Democratic Party. That's, again, something that even when we talk about how it was rigged gets left out of the conversation a whole lot. It would be very easy for the DNC and their backers to do something like this again. Of course, it would not be as easy. That piece of it I'm going to touch on real briefly. I think it is important to understand, if you're to ask the simple question, will the DNC rig this primary against Bernie Sanders too? I think the answer to that is yes and no. Their ability to rig it in the way that happened in 2016 will be minimized. And then also, I think a lot of people do downplay how much, particularly in that election cycle, the DNC and Hillary Clinton were basically one and the same entity. As Donna Brazile, kind of spilled the beans on, and as we came to see, Hillary Clinton basically had direct financial control of the Democratic National Convention committee leading up to the 2016 election and all through it. And this is not even just about Sanders either. She had the advantage of having hegemonic control of the Democratic Party going into that election. And don't take my kooky far left word for it. Again, this is something that Donna Brazile talked about in her bombshell book and article. So that isn't true this time, though. There is certainly no hegemonic power driving the DNC. Now, a lot of people have cited Kamala Harris as being backed by a lot of the DNC insiders and establishment. But at the same time, she's not the only player on the board. You know, the establishment is also fielding candidates like Cory Booker, like Amy Klobuchar. Even Elizabeth Warren, to a certain extent, is somebody the establishment of the Democratic Party is more comfortable with than Bernie Sanders. So it's not that clean cut this time. There's not going to be one particular candidate that the DNC is pushing all of its resources towards. Kamala Harris did not buy up the DNC in the same way that the Clintons did leading up to their election. So that kind of across-the-board rigging for a single candidate is not going to be present in this cycle. I think it's something that gets missed a lot when people get cynical and they're just like, you guys are so dumb. They're just going to rig it against Bernie again. Yeah, my answer to that would be yes, but there's some nuance to it. And again, Bernie is not facing the hegemonic power of a single candidate owning the entire Democratic Party in the same way that happened in 2016. And that is a real crucial piece. And when the establishment do not have a single candidate to rally around, even though a lot of people are kind of pointing signs towards Kamala Harris, that leaves it a lot more open. And it also means that we don't have this kind of just handicap coming right out of the gate. On a political level, I do want to mention, too, Bernie Sanders is not perfect. And I'm going to speak a little bit on the greater side of electoralism in general, but let's not forget, Bernie voted on the FOSTA-SESTA decision, yes, which, as we reported on the show before, has had a terrible side effect of really throwing sex workers under the bus and putting them in direct physical danger. FOSTA-SESTA, just to recap real quickly, was ostensibly to try to curb sex work and child and human trafficking, but the actual effect on sex workers, it kind of pushed them underground. Backpages was taken down. In the months since, Instagram and several social media sites have really clamped down on sexual content. Because even just soliciting, or the implication of soliciting, could get these corporations in huge financial trouble, which has driven sex workers who actually had a degree of autonomy on the internet back to the bad old days of having to rely on abusive pimps. This is coming from a lot of sex workers who are working right now. Frankly, that's hard for me to forgive. I have a lot of friends and comrades who work in that industry, and it's not just oh, you voted wrong on that issue. It's not abstract. That's a concrete thing. Again, that's something we should remember with all of these 2019 or 2020 candidates. None of their hands are clean. They have all made decisions that have affected people in really horrible ways. Again, when we think about it, really, all three of the front runners, and I would say the front runners right now are probably Bernie, Elizabeth, and Kamala. All of them have made decisions that have put people in harm's way. All of them have capitulated, particularly Bernie and Elizabeth have capitulated to the military-industrial complex. Kamala, of course, has her history as prosecutor out in California includes a lot of support of the basically prison slavery system, and she was a very zealous prosecutor back in her day. I actually want to cite something from Caitlin Johnstone. You may have heard of her. She's a kind of popular anti-establishment writer, and she wrote something that really hit the nail on the head about some of my trepidation with Bernie Sanders. I'm just going to read from it directly. While Bernie might not start any new hot wars or engage in the kind of obscene regime change interventionism we're seeing from Trump in Venezuela, under a President Sanders, we can expect to see a continued escalation of the world-threatening Cold War against Russia. And by the way, Bernie, a lot of his supporters try to dismiss it, say oh, he's giving lip service to Russiagate, or even like this kind of four-dimensional chess argument. It's like, no, you don't understand. If he doesn't talk about Russiagate, Democrats will like put him in the doghouse. You know, he really isn't pushing it as much as he is. He has been pushing it rather hard, and he has been very hawkish in a lot of the statements he's made towards Russia. Now, again, on the show, the way we talk about Russiagate, it's overblown. Yeah, there are seedy ties between Trump and corrupt Russian oligarchs and Russian mob, etc. It's all very financial, though, and the way it's portrayed in the media is this very like Manchurian candidate, kind of neo-McCarthyism. And let's be clear, Bernie Sanders has been a part of that. And again, that same kind of like escalating tensions with Russia, that's a palpably dangerous thing. And, from what President Sanders Freudian slip, what Bernie Sanders has said as a matter of public record on Russia, should give us pause to think about how he would be, up against, or not up against, but kind of his tone towards the world's second largest nuclear superpower. Also, under President Sanders, expect continued starvation sanctions against nations which fail to comply with the demands of the U.S. empire, and this is based on his voting record. Continued military expansionism around the world, and very little pushback against the depraved agendas of military and intelligence agencies. We can expect him to play right along with the establishment narrative if the political/media class decides that Assad is gassing civilians and needs a dose of Tomahawk missiles, and we can probably expect him to facilitate the persecution of Julian Assange as well. And again, this is not to say he would be domestically, he would be a fundamentally much better president than really any president we've had, I would say, since Carter or Kennedy. Again, I could critique both of them to a great deal and to a great extent. But, he is sincere when he talks about taking on the billionaire class. You believe in his sincerity when he talks about climate change. But, let's be clear. This guy, he still supports drone missiles. He still supports a lot of these really gross aspects of American empire. And frankly, I have a deep concern that should a President Sanders happen, we could fall asleep at the wheel on some of these issues. And, for me, we're getting paid $15 an hour. We're finally making some progress getting Medicare for all. What about the innocent Afghani whose entire family gets wiped out by a drone missile? Do they get Medicare for all? Do they get paid $15 an hour? Are they going to be part of the Green New Deal? No, they're going to be dead. They are going to be dead due to the American empire, the progressive American empire. And it kind of evokes to me, a lot of people compare Bernie's platform with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That it was not anti-capitalism. That was FDR saving capitalism. And I very much, as somebody, like, I am a socialist. I'm the chair of the Kalamazoo Socialist Party. I am avowedly anti-capitalist. I am not about reform. And that's what Bernie Sanders, that would be his role here. He would be the one coming in to save capitalism, ostensibly from us, from all of us angry anti-capitalist millennials who see a system that is literally killing us, that will drive us towards extinction. That is Bernie's role. And, to the extent that the Democratic Party would actually let him become president, that would be them realizing, hey, this is what's going on again. It's either reform or revolution. We better let this guy reform it before the people want to off with our heads. But that's the really insidious thing. Capitalism remains. Empire remains. And while our material conditions improve, which is a good thing, we could lose sight of these greater problems, and people could continue to suffer in a way that, frankly, under Trump, people have become aware of these issues. And I worry a lot that it'll be similar to the Obama effect, where much of the left falls asleep at the wheel because they think, quote unquote, our guy got in, so things must be going well. It's like, well, people hold his feet to the fire the same way that they do with Trump, the same way that during the end of Obama's administration, the left finally was starting to do so. You can't, a revolution or a political revolution, whatever you want to call Bernie's thing, you have to be able to criticize and critique him. And while I will say he's probably the best candidate running, but frankly, I think that says less about how great Bernie Sanders is and it says more about how poor our choices are in general via electoralism. Even like American electoralism is particularly bad. Like Bernie Sanders would be considered center-left and a lot of the West. His closest analog in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn, runs far to the left in his politics, Bernie Sanders, and of course not as far to the left as I do. And I think there is a fundamental thing we all need to keep in mind about Bernie Sanders. Or ostensibly, people who would do the right thing or try to do the right thing on issues like Medicare for all, on issues like climate change, on reeling in corporate corruption and inequality. I think of those three, you could really say like Elizabeth Warren and Tulsi Gabbard would be the two who would really try to do that, although Elizabeth Warren is closer to the center than both of those two. Not that Tulsi Gabbard doesn't have her problems, but that's for another show. The problem with Bernie Sanders is that, I've been kind of joking around about how a lot of the Facebook sites that I go to for my socialist and communist memes are all now on the Bernie 2020 bandwagon. Here's why that's dangerous. If we put all of our stock in electoralism, which I fundamentally do not think will save us, what's going to happen when it doesn't save us? And it's not going to. That's my opinion, but it's based on a close analysis of the world as it really is. And look, if you're excited about President Sanders, I'm not going to poo-poo on you. Vote for him. I might vote for him in the primary, but again, the FOSTA-SESTA thing affected people I care about, so I am a little remiss to do that. But again, vote for him. But here is the best case scenario. Here is where electoralism alone could get us. Bernie Sanders is president. There's a whole slew of new DSA people into Congress. Let's say it's unprecedented. It's a huge number of them get in, where they get close to even weight with the establishment Democrats in Congress. You're still going to have the Republicans. There's still, and unless something completely improbable happens, you're still going to have a significant corporate wing of the Democratic Party that is going to try to poo-poo and weaken aspects of the Green New Deal. Now, the Green New Deal, it's kind of, it's strange for me to think of as somebody, trying to evaluate from a Marxist lens, because fundamentally, I think trying to fix something like climate change through capitalism is a non-starter to begin with, but it is the only tangible thing that they really have going as far as kind of social democratic reforms that could even begin to approach doing what is necessary. But the Republican and corporate Democrats in Congress are going to weaken it. There is no way in its strongest form it is going to pass under the reactionary U.S. Legislature that we currently have. The Green New Deal, in some form or another, will be kneecapped if it was even going to really solve the problem in the first place. And let's not forget, America is not the only country in the world. We'll be clear, while much of Europe, much of China, much of the rest of the world is doing a much more greater job and with a greater sense of urgency on climate change, they still are not doing enough because they're still under capitalism. Let's look at what's going on in France right now. the whole debate started because basically the French government was trying to pass off the cost of climate change onto regular working people through gas taxes and whatnot. The quickest way to deal with this problem is to nationalize energy industries. It is for people to seize those means of production and stop fossil fuel extraction right away. To continue fossil fuel extraction while taxing regular people who use the fossil fuels that you are forcing them to use because you are not letting companies innovate and create alternatives and get those out into the market in some sort of Marshall Plan style economic action is asinine, and it will not solve the problem. What I'm trying to say here, we don't have enough time. Even if electoralism could solve the climate crisis, we do not have the time for those levers to work them. We have 12 years. We have 12 years. It is only through, again, when I talk about revolution or reform, or Reform or Revolution. That was a book by Rosa Luxemburg. I recommend all of you read it. It was not an either-or question. She came to a definitive answer. It was revolution. Revolution is the only solution. And I don't mean political revolution. I don't mean Bernie's political revolution. I mean the working class people. The working people, the people around the world need to collectivize in the next 10 years, really, and seize these industries that are giving the mankind a death sentence. I firmly do not believe even a President Bernie Sanders would be capable of doing that. And I am further concerned that the election of a President Bernie Sanders obscures that potential because people think that Bernard will solve the climate crisis. And by the time you get 12 years out, you realize, oh wait, he did as much as he could. And, hats off to him for that, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough in the constraints of our reactionary capitalist system that will be fighting that agenda tooth and nail. And that's what I want you to remember. Go into that voting booth, vote how you're going to vote. But remember, and this is my opinion, but it's based on analysis. I do not think that it's the answer or the solution. It is not enough. It just is not enough. And frankly, even if it were enough, which again, it is not. Here's the thing. We've seen this happen before. The last time we had a politician like Bernie Sanders become president was FDR. Again, he had his own imperialist skeletons in the closet, the least of which was the internment camps. But even speaking at their intention was to save capitalism. What has happened since the New Deal? The New Deal was wiped out. It was wiped out by people like Lewis Powell, who laid out the memo for corporate America on how to repeal decades of fights for things like Social Security, for mass unionization that could stake out real demands. The last several decades have seen a massively successful counter-revolution to beat down working people in this country to a point of subjugation. What does that mean? That means if you were to pose another New Deal, something to beat back corporate power without dismantling capitalism, that capitalist power will simply just lay in wait, and we will see this all happen all over again. We have a unique opportunity now to dismantle this system at its roots. We have a moral imperative because it's, frankly, the only thing that will save us from extinction. And if I'm wrong on that, we are still in trouble because capitalism, like a horror movie slasher villain, will come the F back and will kill us all when we're asleep or smoking weed or having teenage sex. So with that thought, let's go to a break. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
You're listening to WIBR FM, and this is your boy, Kill Mitchell. Yeah, that's right, the Good Burger guy, the orange soda guy. I do. Ooh. New movie coming out, WIBR FM. Y'all got to check it out. It's Kill.
Hey there, wider listeners. Know what's even cooler than supporting Radio Evolution? Driving safe in the winter.
So listen to Zia's tips.
If you want to drive safe,
keep a safe distance from other drivers. If you find yourself sliding out of control, turn into the skid to regain control of the vehicle. And if visibility is low, go slow. Don't be afraid to go under the speed limit if you have to. Last but not least, stay warm and keep extra blankets in your trunk or back seat in case of emergency. This has been a friendly reminder from Wider.
There in Radio Land. Didn't have too much to talk about beyond Sanders, but there was a piece of reporting I wanted to feature. So this is connected to something that I was involved with yesterday. So this is a video from the Gray Zone Media Project. There's a lot of really great independent journalists who are involved with it. Max Blumenthal, Aaron Matei. And they did some live reporting very recently down in Venezuela. And this video is from about 2 days ago. And I wanted to highlight it because I personally helped organize. It was a very small little rally outside Fred Upton's office last night, a hands-off Venezuela demonstration. And again, as this is a consistent and ongoing issue, I wanted to keep everybody up to date on it. Again, there are people much smarter than me who've been doing some really great analysis on Venezuela. I point to Democracy Now! And The Real News have both been doing some really good coverage. But this is this is important because this is recent, just a couple of days ago. This is actual man on the street reporting down in Venezuela, and with all the misinformation we've been hearing, that is very, very valuable. So I'm going to go ahead and close out the show by playing this clip. To all of y'all, have a great night. Thank you for tuning in. Again, our episodes always pop up on YouTube, Hoodrat Strategist, and you can follow us on Facebook. Until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution. And you know what? Actually, before I do that, let me go ahead and do the activist calendar real quick. Excuse me. So, excuse me. Oh, there it is, loading up. Okay, so that was today, unfortunately. Okay, so on February 22nd, over The Cope Network is hosting a free Narcan training. It's 2705 Virginia Avenue. It's at a church, and you'll learn how to use Narcan to save somebody who's experiencing opioid overdose, and and you also get a free Narcan. They do ask you to go to their Facebook page and indicate that you're going, so they know they can project how many free doses of Narcan to bring with them. Also coming up later this week on Sunday, February 24th, there is going to be a discussion on consensus over at the Boiling Point. That's over in Gull Road. And basically, this is kind of a training on consensus-style decision-making that is used in a lot of activist spaces. And again, that will begin at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, February 26th. Over in Lansing, there's going to be a kind of rally / demonstration, demand Senator Gary Peters support a Green New Deal. And that's going to be Tuesday, February 26th at 12 p.m. It's listed as to 124 West Allegan, Suite 1400. Again, that's up at Lansing in the state capitol. So now with that, let's go ahead and play this clip. This is Aaron Mate reporting from Venezuela, talking to people on the street about what they think about what's going on.
Regime really wants a civil war in Venezuela. I mean, that there's no way, no matter what the government does, even if we call for elections, they want a civil war to start in Venezuela.
La afinidad del universo está por trascender en mi plano espiritual. El vacío de mi corazón se llena.
We're in Bolivar Square in Caracas, where people have been lined up all day, signing a petition opposing U.S. meddling in Venezuela, denouncing any talk of a U.S. military intervention, and calling for dialogue. Hi there. Hi. So just your name and what you do.
Okay. Hello, my name is Julio Jimenez. I'm an English teacher in Caracas, Venezuela.
Why are you here today?
I'm going to sign for the hands of Venezuela. We want the United States people to know that we're their friends. We love the American culture, but we're against the oligarchy that right now is in charge of ruling the United States. It's a terrible oligarchy that wants to destroy countries for their natural resources. And that's why we're signing today.
The message that is often transmitted in the U.S. media is that the people would welcome U.S. intervention, and that the government here has lost support, and that people want to change. What's your response to that?
Well, all you have to do is look at the long lines. These people have been lining here for days. We've been lining here for several days, and as you can see, first of all, there's an ambience of peace. I don't think anybody in their right mind can want an intervention in the country. You know, just look at what has happened in Libya, look what has happened in other places, and it has simply destroyed their livelihood, right?
What has been the impact of the U.S. sanctions?
Terrible. The impact is there's no way to calculate it. The prices have just soared so high. It is very difficult to find food. The economic situation is terrible for everybody. You know, we have lost quality of life, and it's incredible. You know, these services have been, sometimes these services for water are interrupted. The service for electricity, things like, you know, finding spare parts for a lift, an elevator is very hard to do sometimes. So, you know, so the impact is you cannot value it. You cannot see how far it has gone, right? And yet people support the president.
And with the new sanctions imposed by Trump, do you feel that things could get even worse? And do you think that could be part of the U.S. strategy to make people suffer so much that they finally give up?
Yes, this is the sensation you get is that the Trump regime really wants a civil war in Venezuela. I mean, that there's no way, no matter what the government does, even if we call for elections, they want a civil war to start in Venezuela. That is the sensation you get, because there's no way that they want to reach an agreement or sit down to talk. That's the sensation you get. And of course, that means that the sanctions are going to get worse and worse, right?
And if a civil war happened, what would be the results?
No, a civil war anywhere it has been tried out has meant the total destruction of the people. It has meant going back 30 or 20 years in time. You know, the infrastructure of the country completely vanished. A civil war is the worst thing you can imagine. It doesn't compare to anything.
Allá como en sueño dormí de Alfonsina vestida de mar.